On this episode with Dan on the Street, Dan meets up with Merrill Lynch's very own Joe Torres. Next on Dan on the Street.
We're about to meet Dan on the street, yeah. D-A-N, Dan on the street, yeah. Talking anything with Dan on the street, yeah. D-A-N, Dan on the street, yeah. 10314, just knock on Grace Foundation's door. If you really want to meet Dan on the street, yeah. Dan on the street.
And joining us today, Joe Torres, Senior Vice President of Merrill Lynch here in Staten Island, and also joining us, Matt and Jenna from the Dayhab crew. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you start out, tell us a little bit about what Merrill Lynch is, and then these guys have a couple questions for you.
We are an investment firm. Our parent company is Bank of America. And here on Staten Island, we have one wealth management office and 4 banking centers.
Thank you for joining us today for Dan on the Street at Grace 10314 here at the Grace Foundation.
Matt, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here.
No problem, man. So you're a native Staten Islander that gives back to his community. Can you tell us about some of the community things you do? Also, do you give hot dogs out at all your events?
You know, I know that in this Serenity Garden, we have some of my best customers for hot dogs. And what I like to do when I do a community awareness event is I set up a hot dog cart. Like one of my passions is serving food. I'm a cook myself, amateur, but I take it very seriously. And hot dogs and pizza. Hot dogs and pizza are at the top of my list, so I like to share it with my friends. So if you ever see a hot dog cart in the middle of a business conference, I'm standing behind it and I'll have a hot dog with your name on it.
Hey, Joe, want to hear another name for hot dogs?
Yes.
Glizzies.
Glizzies. I'm gonna use that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what the people these days call hot dogs now, glizzies. Me and my brother call them that.
So from now on, I am Staten Island's official glizzy server. Look for me, Joe the Glizzy Man.
You are the president of the South Shore Rotary, which does so many good things. Why do you feel is it so important to give back?
Well, you know, someone had encouraged me to become involved, and I believe he may be on today's program. He's a very popular jeweler on Staten Island, and he encouraged me on the basis of doing something that not only has significance, but is part of an extended family. That was 9 years ago. And within a few years, I decided to become more involved. I became vice president, and my presidential term was this year, just finishing up now. And I gotta tell you, being part of Rotary was one of the best decisions I made lifelong friends, and it also gives me an opportunity to connect with the community that I grew up in.
Do you know South Shore Rotary means?
Well, the history goes back over 100 years ago. In Chicago, there were 4 people, and they worked at different offices, and they would each get together weekly at one another's office, and they would rotate. So that's how they arrived at the name Rotary, in that they thought that that would be a good description of what they were doing, is rotating across one another's offices. Here we are over 100 years later. Our organization has 1.4 million members globally. So just goes to show you what 4 people can do, how long it can last, and how big it can become.
Now, Joe, you just won an award with the SIEDC for some of your community work. Could you share with us some of the different organizations and places that you work with on the island?
My connections range from Health and Human Services. I'm a director with the organization Project Hospitality under the guidance of Terry Troya. Also work closely with Dan Messina at Richmond University Medical Center. And the crossover reaches into the business community through organizations like the Chamber of Commerce and the Staten Island Economic Development Corporation. So I always try to maintain a balance between focusing on critical needs, but also on the development of the local economy.
So we hear you like to collect records and Beatles memorabilia. What is your favorite Beatles collectible?
Okay, I actually, there's a little story behind this. My parents are to blame for my obsession with music. Because when I was 2 years old, you can imagine a 2-year-old, I guess they felt that it was time for me to get into record collecting. And they gave me 2 albums, record albums. The first was a greatest hits by the Beatles. It was Hey Jude. and the other was Sgt. Pepper's, which was one of the greatest albums. If you guys haven't heard that album, when you get home, if you go on iTunes or Tidal or Spotify or whatever you young folks do.
There's Amazon Music and there's YouTube Music.
See, the old folks like ourselves, what we do is we take this black piece of plastic and we put it on a platter that spins around, and we put a needle on that piece of plastic, and then music comes out of speakers. And back in the day, that was the only way that those of us who were serious about music consumed music. Here I am now, 51 years later, still doing the same thing. But I do notice that young people are getting back into listening to records. And it's been a lifelong obsession of mine. So if I would have to say, if I were to look at my Beatles collection, what's most important to me are those 2 records, which I still have in my collection. At age 2, you really don't take care of your things, so they're very much scratched up. But to me, they're priceless, because that was the beginning of my obsession with music and the Beatles.
Very interesting, Joe. Thank you for everything you do in the community and what you do for Staten Island. We really appreciate you. Jenna and Matt, thanks for being the co-hosts today. And that's Dan on the Street.
Adios.